Do you want to grow orchids, but are you always intimidated by them? If you want to learn how to grow orchids with easy tips, this is the video for you. Orchids are captivating and gorgeous plants, but they can be intimidating to grow as beginners. Let's talk about how to take care of these extraordinary plants that look utterly stunning in your home and your garden. Belonging to the Orchidaceae family are over 25,000 species and 100,000 hybrids. These orchids exhibit diverse characteristics shaped by their epiphytic nature. In their natural habitat, orchids grow on trees and they absorb nutrients and water through the environment from the air and rain. Light requirements: orchids thrive in indirect bright light due to their photosynthetic needs. Placing orchids near a window with filtered sunlight is the most optimal for their needs. Direct sunlight is known to cause leaf scorch, and you should avoid keeping it in direct sunlight. Watering orchids is a crucial part of keeping these orchids alive and healthy. It is important to water your orchid correctly because overwatering can lead to root rot. Orchids with their aerial roots thrive in a well-draining mix of a soil. A great way to water your orchids is when the top 1/3 part of the draining mix is dry to touch. I usually keep watering my orchids on a schedule and just water them once a week so that it simplifies the watering part for me. Watering orchids is a crucial part of the care of an orchid, but it is important to remember that different orchid varieties might have different water requirements. It is important to consider factors such as the orchid type, the medium that it is growing in, and most importantly, the environmental conditions. Here are different ways to water orchids based on their different needs. The first method is my favorite method, which is top-down watering. I will just hold the orchid container in my sink and just water it top down on the soil and let the water just drain out of the soil mix. I let these orchids dry out for the rest of the evening, and the next morning I will put them back in their own containers. This method is suitable for most orchids. Just avoid wetting the leaves because that can lead to fungal issues in the orchid. The second method, which I love to do recently, is soaking the entire pot in water for about 10 to 15 minutes and then taking it out and leaving it to dry. This is a great method for epiphytic orchids that have a lot of aerial roots, and it helps these aerial roots absorb water and get hydrated. It's also important to keep an eye on the humidity levels near the orchid, especially if you're growing them in really dry climates. Orchids love a humid atmosphere, and you can maintain them by keeping the humidity between 40 to 70%. You can achieve this through misting, water trays, or even humidifiers. Orchids love temperatures between 60 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 to 27 degrees Celsius during the day. Slight drops in the temperatures during the night is acceptable to them, but during the day, this is the temperature that it grows its best at. Also, try not to keep it near a draft if you have air conditioning or even heaters going on during winter. I realized when I was living in Philadelphia that we used to have a heater where I used to keep the orchid, and it was blowing this air constantly on the orchid, and the orchid slowly started dying. And I think it was drying out the orchid too quickly. Take a look at your home and look at the different vents, and try not to keep any of the plants in the path of your air vents. It is important to pick the right pot and the medium for the orchid. One of my favorite pots for the orchids are these pots with a lot of holes or slits on the side. They allow all the water to just drain out of it and keep minimal moisture in the container. Similar goes with the medium that you're planting in. I absolutely detest the moss that most of the big box stores plant the orchids in. I really always want to take out the moss as soon as I bring the orchid home. The orchid stays soggy and the roots are always more diseased when you grow it in that medium. The best medium is to grow orchids in an orchid bark like this medium that I am using today to repot all of my containers. I love this material because it is a well-draining mix, but you can also use other materials like perlite or charcoal to plant orchids. I have recently read that orchids do really well in charcoal, so that might be an experiment I would be doing in the future. You should fertilize your orchid every every 2 to 4 weeks with a well-balanced orchid fertilizer. I have been using this Espomo fertilizer for my orchid for the past, I would say, month or 2 months. And already I can see that I have a new growth forming on this orchid that I had used it with. I used to use a different fertilizer before, but I noticed that it was drying my orchid too much and my leaves had started drying out and dying. So I switched to this fertilizer recently and I have absolutely loved it. As of now, they are doing really well with this fertilizer. I would keep you updated in another 6 months how I feel about this fertilizer. It's important to fertilize the orchid every 2 to 4 weeks during the growing season, and I would slow down the fertilization during its dormancy period. If you also notice that the orchid is flowering, I would slow down how much you are fertilizing the orchid. A great way to improve the orchid's vitality and its health is to repot and prune it. If you have spent blooms or dead leaves, prune them off so that they can direct all the energy into the main plant itself, and that can help you create even more buds and more flowers on the orchid. Every time you're pruning the plant, use sterile tools to prune the plant. I usually use 70% alcohol and just spray it on my pruners before I cut into my plant. You can also use hydrogen peroxide and just spray it on the pruners before you give your plant a prune. This is important to prevent the spread of any diseases in the plants. Trim the flower spikes just above the node and remove any dead or damaged leaves or flowers from the plant. So this orchid that I have has a new flower spike that is coming off right over here, and I don't want to disturb that. So I don't want to repot it at this point. I would pot it after it's done. But what I do want to do is give it a little bit of a cleanup, because right now all these branches are just taking in resources, which makes no sense. They don't need to. And now that I'm actually looking at it, I have 2 of these spikes coming off. I'm going to cut off the other branches and leave the branches where they have the spikes and let the rest of the orchid just be. Again, time to spray. I'm going to look at each spike and cut it off. So this spike doesn't have anything going on right now. So I'm going to come all the way down here and just snip it like that. But here now I have a new one coming here and a new one coming here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this one, cut this one off. Check this, cut it off. Regular monitoring and strategic pruning of an orchid is important for a healthy life cycle of an orchid, and one that will give you flowers for years to come. How to repot an orchid. I love to repot an orchid every 1 to 2 years with a new growing medium. Sometimes if I have a plant with lots of roots, I might also upscale it to a larger pot. But otherwise, the same pot should be enough. And once you clean off all the old dead roots and change the complete medium. When you're repotting, carefully remove the orchid from the storage container and inspect the roots, trimming away any dead or decayed roots at the base of the plant. The main reason to repot an orchid is to refresh the potting medium, address overcrowding of roots, and provide a new environment with essential nutrients. And if you want to repot the orchid, I would suggest doing it every 1 to 2 years. Also, don't repot the orchid if you have any new growth showing up on the orchid. Wait until the blooms have bloomed completely on the plant and have fallen off, and then repot the orchid, because you don't want to disturb the orchid while it is in bloom. It might actually damage the new growth or even damage the flowers themselves. A little bit of patience and attention can give you a rewarding experience with growing an orchid that will reciprocate by giving you stunning blooms for years to come. Just like orchids, roses are also another of my favorite flower to grow. And if you're looking to grow some in your garden, check out this video right here.